Hi, I'm Stuart Fairley, Managing Director of Elmhurst Energy.
Hello, I'm Andrew Parkin. I'm Technical Development Director, Elmhurst Energy.
Hi, I'm Simon Flint. I'm Retrofit Support Team Leader for Elmhurst Energy.
All from Elmhurst Energy then. Good. Right, again, hello and welcome to another one of our informal discussions. Today we're going to be talking about one of the hottest topics at the moment, again, retrofit, what's happening in the industry, what's changing. We've had past 2035, 2023. That came into being very recently. It's all changing. What's going on? So we've got some questions. I think we've got 6. We haven't seen them. Number one's here. Shall we get going?
We haven't seen the questions, we've seen an envelope.
It's in an envelope, yes. We've not seen them.
We've obviously done this before. Right, you've just answered. Why was past 2035, 2023 introduced, and when did it come into force, for those that are able to read? I'm going to pass that to my fellow colleague Simon.
Do you want me to take that? Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
go on. I'll put that to you.
That's ballsy to go for your first question. Hand straight over to Simon.
The standard was originally introduced now 5 or 6 years ago. There have been 2 or 3 iterations since, the most recent being the 2023 one. It was first published back in October 2023, hence the name, hence the title. We had a period of about 12 to 18 months transition, when essentially you could use either the 19 standard or the 2023 standard. But from the end of March this year, the 2023 standard was formally adopted. It's the only game in town now, and all new projects have to follow this new standard.
I remember being at Future Build, and we're still outstanding some detail around the transition for assessments.
Absolutely.
And it all happened at Future Build. It was quite exciting, but completely late in the day, and we were scrambling around trying to get the message out.
It was about the carryover of work that a lot of companies had started and got underway, but hadn't had the opportunity to lodge yet. And with the new standard and the transition happening, would they have to lodge them? Would they have to convert a lot of the data into the new standard compliance? But fortunately, that particular hurdle was crossed, and it became a much easier, smoother transition. And there was some carryover. If you'd started your project under 2019, you are allowed to finish it under 2019. But all the new projects now, as I said, from April, are to that 2023 standard.
Yeah.
For those not full of acronyms and years, the reason I dodged the question, I think, is because I think for about 2 or 3 years of my life, I'm getting old and I can't remember years, if I'm being honest. But anyway, I remember having to spend some time at BSI delivering the original standard 2019 that eventually came out, and trying to figure out how and what a good framework looked like for retrofitting homes. And I always bring it back to that because in my mind there was a big review called Each Home Counts review, which basically was trying to understand how to do retrofit stuff in people's homes in a good way. And then it took that committee an awful long time. Bless, there was an awful lot of patience and a lot of people with a point of view, which you can imagine it was really, and it ended up being that 29 version. And there was always an intention that it just gets refined and gets better as lessons are learned. So that's why I sort of avoided the 2023. I was involved in the 2019 but it was never going to be perfect.
No, essentially that's what 2023 is. It's an improvement. Yeah. It's a fine tuning of the previous standard. And there've been some changes. Don't get me wrong. There are some different requirements now. We might move on to those in a minute or two. But there's some different requirements of an assessor, and probably more specifically of a coordinator. Probably has a bigger impact on coordinators. But I'm sure. Let's see what question 2 says.
Well, I mean,
might spin us into that
Let's
particular.
find out, shall we?
Hope it's out.
It's like an awards ceremony, isn't it? How has a retrofit assessor role changed within PAS 2035, 2023? I think we should just call it PAS 2035. So there's the question.
I previewed that just 30 seconds ago, didn't I? Essentially, from an assessor's perspective, there's still quite a large data collection exercise to be done on site. Obviously, with the recent introduction of RDSAP 10, that has expanded because the data set for RDSAP 10, now we've finally gone live with that, means that obviously there's more information there and a better quality output, a more accurate assessment of the energy of the property. The condition report has been fine-tuned as well, and there's more emphasis on existing ventilation. there's a requirement now not just to say if there's a trickle vent, but to actually measure the trickle vents, measure all the background ventilation, and also where possible to measure and record the flow rates of intermittent extract fans. Now, not every assessor currently would have the training, the competency, or the equipment to do that, but hopefully we can move towards upskilling our workforce to enable them to actually be able to complete those roles.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm going slightly off piece, but I think the whole concept we were debating about future home standard in a previous one of these, and talking about, when you talk about retrofit, it becomes quite narrow if you only talk about the energy efficiency. So we're going to make this quite airtight. We're going to do some improvements to this, save energy, save carbon, whatever the metric is, cost. And again, the downside and the unintended consequences of doing that in a really good way, by the way, would be that your ventilation has been forgotten about.
Absolutely.
So I think the whole concept of a pass for this retrofit was about the holistic approach to the home.
Absolutely.
So actually, by identifying things that aren't quite working, and that tweak is always going to occur over time, and absolutely ventilation is one of the absolute pillars that you end up not either having a house that's got a gale force blowing through it, or even slightly worse, as you get something so airtight that then the mould, the damp and everything else starts to go, which is obviously in the news. So I can well understand why that was introduced.
We've seen a lot of questions around the testing of ventilation, with hoods and the vane anemometers and stuff. Are we any closer to sort of a consistent approach on that as an industry, or is that still being discussed?
I think that's still being discussed. Certainly from an Elmhurst perspective, we're looking at upskilling and offering some additional training to our members that enable them to achieve that sort of competency. We have a competency scheme that allows them to join once they are trained. There's new training courses on the calendar now with a couple of different providers that enable us to be able to measure existing fans that are in situ.
But it's also got to flow through to the coordinator and installers to actually understand what that number means, isn't it? So
exactly.
I've always been a massive believer that you see a box and a unit and it says it X amount of flow rate at litres per second on the box, and what gets stuck into the house, with depending on how they then navigate out to the outside world, can be something different.
Absolutely.
I'm going to be careful with my words, but I think that's the point. You should leave in the homeowner with something.
You've got a declared flow rate that might be on a fan from an installer, but a lot of that is determined by how it's been installed. So has it been installed competently, and how old is it?
So I'm a big believer in this, isn't it? The retrofit assessment was always intended to collect as much data as possible about that home, so that the coordinator and then the designers and the installers can do a good job. Right? So that's still the essence and spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. The assessment is a data collection exercise to build up a picture of what's exactly happening in that property, and then anything that's built upon that hopefully is built on firm foundations, and it's going to go on. And
you've got that nice expression, haven't you?
Yeah. If you start with wobbly foundations, you will end up with a wobbly house.
That's true,
And the point is the retrofit assessment is fundamental. If you get that wrong for whatever reason, or it's incomplete, or worse than that, fraudulent, then everything that builds upon that afterwards has the potential to go wrong. So you've got to get those first building blocks right.
Yeah, you said that on a podcast, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. I said exactly this morning. I was in a meeting this morning, and the phrase I used, and somebody wrote it down and said, I'm going to use that, was, if you start with wobbly foundations, you are going to end up with a wobbly house. And I've quoted it a number of times since. It's become my stock phrase.
The Elmhurst Energy Talks podcast is available on all good
shameless plug.
Services, and we now film it, so it's in on YouTube. So please like and subscribe. Right, okay. Shall we get on to question number 3?
My turn to open an envelope.
Go on.
I have a suspicion I know what this might be, but I'll open it anyway. How has a retrofit coordinator's role changed within the new PAS 2035-2023 standard?
So we've had assessor, now we're on coordinator.
Okay.
You said there was quite a bit of change.
Yeah, from a coordinator perspective, there is. The risk path that they used to start a process with, risk path A, B or C, those have gone. Which means there's a greater emphasis on the whole documented process that starts with the assessment, the intended outcomes, and then the improvement option evaluation and a medium-term plan, which on the lower scale in the previous standard was ignored and wasn't mandated. Now it absolutely is. That medium-term plan now has to consider monitoring and evaluation at the end of the process as well. Really important. You've got to measure what you've done. You've got to make sure you haven't had those unintended consequences. And if you have, you've got to learn from them, you've got to put them right for the homeowners. Following on very similarly from the assessment, there is a greater emphasis on ventilation and a ventilation assessment that they now have to compile. And probably one of the biggest fundamental changes, and it has been overlooked by some people, is when you're considering a package of measures for the property, it's now not just about the measures you're installing, it's about whatever else has happened to that property since it was constructed.
How they interact.
Yeah, and how they interact. So your measure might, for instance, be solar PV on the roof, and that's the only thing you're doing. But if that property has already had new windows and new doors and cavity wall insulation and loft insulation over the 20, 30, 40 year period since it was constructed, you have to also consider the implications of those measures when you're looking at the ventilation strategy.
It almost comes back to that thing I said earlier. Each home counts. Each home is different, and I remember saying that. People artificially drive down a road and they say, "All these houses are all the same." And you go, but they're not until you go inside and see how many drill holes and what people have done over the years, what technology.
It's about how that property's been used, how those habits of those homeowners.
Yeah, it's also that architect. This will solve it all, and I don't think that's true, but. That's slightly off topic.
No, it is off topic slightly, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. So there's risk paths have gone. There's greater emphasis on ventilation. The design function, design requirements within PAS have changed, and that's put greater emphasis on experience and skill and knowledge and qualifications. It's simply being a coordinator isn't any longer enough to be able to be considered competent to do the design. You need additional skill sets beyond that and qualifications. And the other one, which we've not spoken about yet, is the requirement of site visits. There's a requirement now for a coordinator to do either an in-person or a remote site visit, dependent on the complexity of the project and the number of measures and the interaction between those measures. And that's going to change the world for a lot of coordinators, where previously it's been essentially a desk-bound job. Yeah. It's no longer a desk-bound job, or shouldn't be.
So it's more geographically significant, isn't it?
Absolutely, You've got to factor into your working week. How many sites have I got to go to? When have I got to go to them? Because ideally you need to be there when those measures have been installed. So you've got to work quite closely with designer, with installer, to make sure those visits are scheduled, if not by you, by somebody qualified and able to deputise for you.
It's a true project manager.
Yeah, absolutely, it really is.
Yeah, interesting. And do you think coordinators are aware of this? Is there some? I mean, we're talking about it now. I think
there's. Yeah, I mean, it's been the PAS standard's been out, as we said, for months. It's a dry document. It's not the sort of thing you're going to read as light bedtime reading. So
speak for yourself, Simon.
There will be elements of it that may have been missed, but. There's information out there. Trustmark have put out quite a good 2-3 page user guide about site visits, about when it's required, who should be doing them, and I know there's ongoing sort of talks internally here, and we're looking at talking with partners where maybe we can provide some form of platform where that data might be collected, some form of site visit form or some sort of app potentially where that site visit could be directed or be used in person. So watch this space, because that's really exciting.
I can imagine the administration of that and just actually keeping a diary of when you need to be on site or when somebody is visiting site on your behalf and who's doing that and when and gathering all that evidence.
Exactly. It's about that. It's the gathering the evidence. It's making sure that's put together in an appropriate professional manner, and that you can record that, because it's part of your requirement to load up to Trustmark. It's a document they're going to be looking for when they come to audit the project at the end. Has that coordinator been to site? When did they go? What evidence did they collect? Have they documented that appropriately?
So watch this space, I guess, on that one. Shall we move on? Come on. Oh, we didn't. Before you do, we haven't talked about traditional buildings.
We haven't, and that's that. To be fair, that affects both assessors and coordinators. Definition of a traditional building within the PAS framework is anything solid brick, regardless of when it was built; anything solid stone, regardless of when it was built; anything pre-1919. Your dwelling falls into any of those categories, and that accounts for about 3 million properties, I think, now throughout the UK. As an assessor or coordinator, you need to have the level 3 qualification in older and traditional buildings to actually work on those properties. So yeah, you're quite right, Andy. That's another change that came in with that past standard change.
It's about extra competency,
Yeah.
making sure everybody involved in the process has the relevant
Yeah.
competency.
But they're very different, aren't they, in the way they breathe and the way they react,
Well,
to the way they
that's-
talk.
yeah,
Not-
that's-
I'm talking like scientists, but
Yeah,
they are very, very different as a
exactly.
building.
You have to understand
Moisture.
how the building was built in the first place to ensure that whatever you do to it retrospectively
Yeah,
is done in
Which is
an appropriate and
correct.
sympathetic manner.
yeah, correct.
Okay.
Right. What's this question we on for? Is air tightness testing mandatory for every retrofit project?
So it goes back
You
to
sort of
something you
said
were
it,
saying,
yeah.
isn't it?
Is it
The honest answer to that,
mandatory?
no, it's not mandatory. No, it's absolutely not. Is it good practice though? Yes, absolutely it is. It's a method of measuring not only what that property is doing before you start, but also then at the end of the project, have you left it in an appropriate state where it can not only use less heat and act more efficiently and provide better air quality for the occupants, but also can it breathe properly? Can it provide good quality air,
Yeah.
air quality for the homeowners? Have they mitigated any risk of damp, mould, condensation and that?
I think on the previous version where people were, I mean, I had conversations with people where they were just putting hair bricks and holes, for what about, like, using
Yeah.
non-layman term,
core
putting them
vents and things like
into
that.
people's homes, and there was force 10 gale coming through the front door, and they were, this is just because because the past said you had to.
Yeah.
It wasn't the past saying you had to, it was actually the definition of people understanding.
Yeah.
So I would always say that actually a measurement of something, obviously everything that's sort of built around methodologies is always it's a model, it's a guess of what should happen in reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that's a measurement is a good thing, isn't it? In the right place. So
So long as
if
it's-
you were stopping somebody
Yeah.
doing that sort of behaviour and you're going, this house has got, we'll put another hair brick in it. Actually measure it at the beginning, measure it at the end, and have a success that actually you've left the home in a better place.
I mentioned the coordinator's role requires them to complete a ventilation strategy for every project.
Yeah.
That strategy may or may not set some testing requirements,
Yeah.
and if you set a standard, you have to test to that standard. But clearly, if you're starting to significantly affect the fabric of that property, it's got to be good practice to test it both pre and post. I would think it's just common sense. It really is.
In many ways, it can inform strategy, which then means that you're not installing anything unnecessary, and that also saves cost as well, doesn't it?
And inconvenience. I mean, if you've
Yeah.
essentially if you've got a leaky building to start with,
Yeah.
why would you then want to knock more holes in it and make it more leaky?
And
But if
then
you-
blame the
Yeah,
past.
if you
It is
measure
mad.
it and
Yeah.
demonstrate that,
But
but
it-
likewise, if it's really airtight, you need to know that as well.
Well, because
So
actually, if you make it more
do then
airtight,
put-
you're really in trouble, aren't you?
Yeah,
I mean, let's
absolutely.
be honest,
You-
the ventilation is key
yeah,
to
you have
getting the
to
heat.
put-
And
you have to make sure it's adequately ventilated
Yeah.
ultimately.
Well, we've seen all sorts of things happening in the news about the build-up of mould and things like that.
Yeah.
And I can't say for certain whether that's necessarily around poor ventilation, but clearly there's a poor outcome there, isn't there?
it's kind of fundamental to it, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, it is complicated, but it's not complicated. This is something that's been known about in my mind for a long, long time. Is you have a build tight, ventilate right. It's an expression that everybody knows in the industry.
Absolutely.
And yet you sort of like, well, I'll do this one. Well, that one's okay. No, hand in glove. They go together.
Yeah.
Because actually, one without the other, you end up with an unintended. So it's about your ventilation strategy. And also, I would say, is obviously we can do whatever we want, put stuff in, put kit in. But you've got to educate the user. You've got to educate the homeowner, the tenant who ends up living there, because the amount of times we've all been to homes and the trickle vents are taped shut. The air bricks is already.
The washing's draped over the radiators.
So that's when it gets complicated, because
Yeah,
a
of course
building
it
is a building, but it's only really a building that's of any use to anybody when somebody lives in it. So or occupies it. And so the idea is that actually this whole idea of each home counts, and a massive piece that's missing, by the way, and this is another day, was about educating the person in the home. It's all about them.
Yeah.
What I find is an awful lot about process and all about putting stuff in. And you go, oh, that's great. And then it's got to go, now, who's going to use that? Who's maintaining it? Who's actually
It's
using it
interesting you raise that
correctly?
point, because
Sorry,
again, one of the things that the new PAS standard pushes is the various points during the process where advice is really important.
Key.
And there's four sort of fundamental sort of spaces, obviously right at the start, to agree an intended outcomes, if you like. What does the homeowner, the occupier, ultimately want at the point of design? But then right at the end, the education piece. Here's your new property. This is what we've done with it. This is how it's been improved. This is how you get the best out of it. This is how you should you know,
Well, with-
maybe think about adapting your living standards or style.
And also if you're using new modern tech,
yeah,
which
course,
is kind of not what you had before. It's a really different way of heating homes or ventilating homes
Yeah,
or whatever the technology
you
is.
start putting, you know, mechanical ventilation into a property that has to run 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
If you don't educate the people whose homes that is, they're going to be turning it off. They're going to be concerned about high bills, too noisy, whatever.
But this,
and it's not doing what it's fundamentally there to do.
I think that one part that I always found a little bit, nobody seemed to talk about it a lot, and I think that is one of the fundamental points of each home. Okay, unashamedly talk about each home council. I'd love to go back through all the recommendations.
Yeah, there was 36 recommendations of it, weren't there?
Very
really?
right,
I mean, I completely agree. Irrespective whether this is an existing dwelling that's being retrofitted, probably need a better word for retrofitting. By the way, I've never been a big fan of it. We know what it means, and it's used in all our documentation, but prefer it to be something else out in the world. You know, consumers understand. But when you're dealing with new build, we are getting to a stage now where all that new technology is being installed. You're going to hand that building over to a person who's never lived there before. What do they do with it? It's the same thing, isn't it?
Well, and the chances are they're moving from a property that didn't have that technology.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So it is genuinely new to them.
We've got to be better at these things. Right. Question 5. Oh, well, I think we've probably answered this one. Why is ventilation important when retrofitting homes?
As said before.
I think, I felt like I was in a tennis match there, actually, between you two. But basically what they said, it has been ignored for so long, hasn't it? I mean, I'd say in the last 3 years it hasn't been ignored, but it's taken a while to bubble up to the surface and everybody to recognise its importance. But as we do improve our buildings, we've got to take ventilation into consideration as we do it.
I think there's something everything we said before, but it's also about, and you've mentioned the word a few times today, which is really important, it's competency, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's competency of doing the job well that you are able to do, right? But it's really, really important about not doing something you are not competent doing. Stop. Because actually the danger of trying to do something is actually you're going to end up with these unintended consequences. Yeah. And that's historically where this stuff's gone. So when people are creating these roles, I'm not one of them anymore and I'm not one of these. We're just going to go, but do you know the unintended consequences of putting that pipe in wrong or that X, Y?
Absolutely.
Again, so it's not to stop innovation and stop people having a go, but the idea of doing good quality is that the competency is key. I mean, look at everything that's going through central government at the moment is about competencies of individuals doing the right job.
Yeah.
So as painful as this feels, this idea about ventilation as well as energy efficiency working together might not necessarily be the same person.
No, it might not be the same person.
I mean, they can, because obviously, as long as
fortunately, I think there's training, there's further learning out there. I mean, Elmhurst themselves have got various courses on air tightness, on background ventilation, on measuring existing ventilation. So there are chances there and opportunities for any of our members to upskill themselves to obviously, achieve a greater level of knowledge and understanding and be able to offer those skills to
the outcome of the home,
to
isn't it? When you think?
for the benefit of the property ultimately. So
we've seen
it's really important.
Well, absolutely.
It is important.
We've seen plenty of our members do the background ventilation training and have augmented their business, added to it, or become a specialist in those areas as well. Which, because of the demand that's come through the retrofit process. But it's not just that creates the demand as well. There are multiple other uses of it. So that's the key here is, whilst retrofit is driving a lot of these sorts of things, it is often a precursor to it happening somewhere else. Things like measured energy performance, which we won't get onto today because we don't have time, but one of the usage cases for that initially to get up and running is pay for performance in Eco4 if that thing ever happens. We see it happen over here and then it starts to be used because they've got loads of competent people and you can apply it in other ways.
So scalability as well, isn't it? You need to be able to, you need to cover the whole country, so it needs to be enough people to be able to do it at an affordable, cost. So I think that's where we sit with some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Should we go to number 6?
Last question.
This is the killer question, is it?
You can
What can retrofit professionals do?
What? Ooh.
What next, or can they do right now? Or,
that's the question. What can they do? They can. I think you've just said it. They can do whatever they want within their competency.
Yes.
We have courses for retrofit assessors. We now have the ability to train our own retrofit coordinators in house. We've been able to build that qualification course around all our background knowledge and understanding that we've had over those 3, 4, 5 years working with Trustmark
the
auditing
auditing,
members
yeah.
and this sort of thing. So we've been able to develop and build a really good course for coordinators.
Yeah.
But then you've got the ancillaries, you've got the U-value calculations, you've got background ventilation, you've got, you've got air testing. There's lots of things they can do to expand their knowledge and skill set, but you need to be competent at what you do to ensure that people get the right outcome. Ultimately, we're talking about people's homes.
Yeah.
And nobody should ever lose stuff.
But also the competency is really key, isn't it? Once you do something, it doesn't matter which part of this journey that you're doing, you're putting your name on that.
Yeah.
Your name or your company's name, and so we did that, and you're responsible for that. So, and lots of people try and then finger point if it doesn't go right. But if you actually follow the process and everybody has been competent and done what they need to do, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
In my mind,
Absolutely.
and people can dip, and you've explained some companies will go and do X, Y, and Z, some will do A, B, C. That's okay but the homeowner cares about the outcome.
Yeah.
So they just want to make sure that what ends up in the home is good. So it's then down to the coordinator, because they're sort of this same single point to make sure that the people who are doing the parts are competent.
Yeah. Did the assessor do a good job?
So you
Did
don't have
the
to do it
designer,
all.
Did the installers?
Yeah.
Fundamentally, are they all good at their individual specialities?
And take responsibility for that. And say,
definitely.
I did a really good job. That's where it is. That's where I've handed it over to the next person in the chain, and the conduit in the middle is just making sure that it occurs. Obviously, that's a piece of paper, but the reality is about the outcome of the one measure, the two, the three, whatever it is good. It's better than it was before.
Well, you come all full circle back to monitoring and evaluation, which is part of the medium-term plan now. Which that could be as simple as a sit-down conversation back with your client. Well, at the outset, what you were looking for was a warmer home, higher SAP scores, lower bills, better fuel, better air quality.
Yeah.
Have we achieved all of those? Yeah. And it's about closing that loop and.
One hopes as well, I know it's not quite there yet, but the whole idea in my mind was a medium-term plan. I mean, the world's not full of endless money. The money tree, they used to say, didn't they? So that medium-term plan might identify 5 things. At that point in time, the homeowner might only be able to afford, whether it's grant funding or anything, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, cool. 2
of them or something like that. Yeah. But the other 3 are still there, aren't they?
The property would still benefit.
It's almost like the closed
absolutely.
loop process should come back and go a couple of years. I'm not saying that everybody has lots of money to do all these things, but surely those are still there. They're like leads for the government almost. In respect of,
absolutely, of course they are.
We know that house could do A, B and C, but at that time we weren't able to for whatever reason. So I think that's where we need to start to really concentrate on the fact it's not about sticking that in. That medium-term plan should really be with the homeowner, and it's their document to move forward with.
And actually it's a great outcome as well in itself, isn't it? It doesn't have to be retrofit happens directly after that. That's nice, but a plan is a great starting point. And you can take that with you and do things with it. Unless you dramatically change the property and don't update the plan. But
technology might change. There might be things that come onto that list that weren't available in 2012.
People's circumstances change, occupiers of properties change. And, there's all sorts of possibilities that ultimately that property would benefit from some of the things on that plan. As you said, it might not be financially appropriate at that particular time, but 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line.
I think the occupants, like you said, the goals might change in 3 years. It might be, I want to do X, and can you help me get back there? The plan needs re-looking at and readjusting, and saying, right, there's the options for you, Mr. Lewis.
I'm just mindful of, looking at things like the building safety regulator. They've come in and looked at all the buildings in the UK, not just high rise, which has taken a lot of the focus, but even when you're dealing with your common or garden 3-bed semi-detached, they have said that's as important. That anything that goes on in those properties, whether it's retrofit or any sort of remedial works, is done correctly, and it's got a proper, competent person doing the right job at the right time.
Correct.
And I think that's such an important thing, and we just keep repeating it because it is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, I think that covers everything. We've answered all the questions, which is great.
Where we should be.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I felt like I was in a tennis match there, so I'm going to go away after this and give my neck a rest. Thank you for watching today. If you need any further information on anything we've talked about, then obviously our website is available. All the technical support documentation that we create as a scheme, if you remember, and also the technical support teams are available at your convenience. So please do contact us. And thank you so much for watching.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Game, set and match.
Thanks very much.